I'm very pleased to introduce our second speaker, Armando Fox, who also has done a lot of work and is very well known for his work on things like the AMP Lab and other projects in mobile computing and so on. He is also the winner of multiple teaching awards, both at Stanford and here at Berkeley. He's on the faculty here at Berkeley, and he also received his PhD here. And most recently has just announced that he is the recipient of the Carl V. Carlstrom ACM Teaching Award, which he shares, by the way, with Dave Patterson. So, thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks. You'll notice that I also deviated in the title a little bit. I'm supposed to tell you about the future of jobs in MOOCs, and I'll do that, but there's some fun stuff first before prognosticating. By the way, I just want to point out regarding the Carlstrom, which I was humbled to receive, it really ought to be shared with Dave, but it turns out he already has one, so that was impossible. I would also like to point out, for the record and on camera, that this means that Berkeley has more Carlstrom winners than any other institution, so go Bears. Just happy to be on the team. So this is a topic that has become really near and dear to my heart. I have spoken to lots of groups about it, but here I am going after the Michael Jordan of machine learning, who, by the way, is also the drummer in our 80s cover band Disposable Pop, and a very good one he is. Oh yeah, is Kim still in the audience? Shout out to our vocalist, Kim Keaton, carrying on the Berkeley tradition. She's the lead vocalist for Disposable Pop, and a very good one at that. The only Grammy-nominated computer scientist I know, by the way. That's really true. And of course, before that, we heard from my PhD advisor, Eric Brewer, from when I was at Berkeley. So, you know, and then we have a tough crowd filled with Patterson collaborators and students, so no pressure. It'll be a great talk. Anyway, let me briefly say how I first met Dave. He probably doesn't remember this, but I remember it very clearly. I showed up for graduate student visit day when I got admitted to Berkeley. I was really excited to come here. I was kind of deciding between here and the University of Washington, kind of my final two choices. And I sat down at a lunch table on the lunch on the first day, and he sits next to me and he goes, "Hey, I'm Dave Patterson." You know, to me, I had just done my master's at Illinois doing computer architecture stuff. I just worked at Intel for 2 years doing P6, which you probably know as the Pentium Pro. I was on that design team. I had learned computer architecture from Dave's book. I'd read his papers on RISC. This is like a Catholic pilgrim having somebody sit down and go, "Hey, I'm the Pope." You know, just good to meet you. And I have to say, having spent time at a number of universities where people who are distinguished unfortunately act like they're distinguished. But Dave was so informal and so welcoming that I really think I just sort of immediately felt at home. And I actually think that was one of the big reasons that ultimately I did choose to come to Berkeley, and it was a great decision. So I participated in the Now project. Dave was not my advisor, but you know he was part of this big group that I think did great things. And then as a faculty member at Stanford and now back here again, I was part of many other projects. And actually the story of how we got into MOOCs and related things actually starts in the Rad Lab project. You know, Matej Zaharia mentioned previously that we worked on this white paper called Above the Clouds. And at that time, we had started the Rad Lab, and Amazon had just announced the public availability of Amazon Web Services. You could rent computers for sort of pennies an hour. And I think Dave has said, it's one of the few things he'll say, you know, non-modestly, that he's got a good knack for identifying when something is going to be big. And he said, you know, the cloud computing, I know that a lot of people are saying this is hype, it's just relabeling of stuff, but actually this is going to be big. And in fact, if you now go to Google Scholar, and you just type the words cloud computing in. I don't know if anybody knows this, but the white paper, A View of Cloud Computing, is the #2 hit. The only thing higher than that is the National Institute of Standards and Technology definition of what is cloud computing. So now when Dave says something is going to be big, you know, I kind of tend to listen, even if I'm skeptical. #2 hit, and this is a Google Incognito window, so you know, no gaming, it doesn't know it's me or anything like that. By the way, you'll notice that you don't see Dave's name and the authors there. It's because they're in alphabetical order. That was a best practice that he outlined yesterday in his talk. Put the author names in alphabetical order. So one of the things that we were doing in the Rad Lab project is we were building data centers whose operation would be informed by applied machine learning. That's actually how I first got to start working with Mike Jordan. And the thing about a data center is it's kind of hard to demonstrate it on its own. Data centers are there to run other apps, so we figured we would need some apps to demonstrate what the data center could do with our cool new machine learning-enabled data center software. Except at Berkeley, we had no courses or any other way that students could learn to write those apps. So it wasn't easy to find students who could do it. So what do? Let's create a course. We created a crash course with the help of a professional developer who we hired. And he helped us put together a crash course to help students learn how to write web apps so that we could have a compelling demo to put on top of our data center. Now remember, Dave is technically not a software person, and in all honesty, really neither am I. So it's a little weird to be up here giving this talk, but this ultimately led to a new software engineering course. We did this experimental course. It was very well received by the students, so we kept offering it again and again, even after the Rad Lab project was officially over. And you could see the enrollments climbed up to 75 and 110 students. We had to start to think about, can we start automatically grading these programming assignments so that we can offer this to more students? And our colleague, Paul Hilfinger, said, this course seems like it's pretty popular. If you sort of beef it up with the sort of traditional discipline software engineering content, maybe you could replace the existing software engineering course, which had kind of a very mixed reputation among the students. So we thought, okay, well, if we're going to teach a course, let's figure out what books are available, because we're going to have to learn some of this material really on our own. And the textbooks that we found were just horrible. They had 1.7-star reviews on Amazon. These are actual quotes from some of the Amazon reviews. It's a horrible, out-of-date software engineering book, train wreck in print. Only buy it if you want an out-of-date summary of a lot of stuff. This book is harmful to software engineering. So what do we do? Was there anybody in this project who had experience writing textbooks that were successful when they were disgusted with the state of the art in textbooks? Yes, we decided that we were going to write a new book based on industry feedback from all of the companies who had been participating in the Rad Lab. So a nice convergence of a lot of industrial funding meant that these companies were more than ready to give us ideas about what our CS students were missing in their software careers. To make a long story short, Dave mentioned it yesterday, that book is called Engineering Software as a Service. It won the Texty Award very recently, which was kind of fun. It shows up on the Amazon Top 100 list in its category pretty regularly. It's very highly reviewed, and that's continued sort of since the first edition came out. And it's available in multiple languages. We even did a nice op-ed piece in Communications of the ACM talking about our experience self-publishing. We wanted to keep the price low. The Kindle book is $10, probably the cheapest textbook that's out there that isn't actually free. But while we were doing that, something else very interesting was happening. And that was the launch of the first couple of experimental MOOCs from Stanford. This is the homepage as it appeared in 2011 for Andrew Ng's course on machine learning, and he announced we're going to open this up to anybody who wants to register. The videos are going to be online. You're going to get to do the same homeworks that Stanford students get to do. Little bit later that summer, Peter Norvig and Sebastian Thrun said that they were also going to put their AI course online. It sort of got a tremendous amount of press, and around that time, Andrew Ng and his colleague Daphne Kohler, who now is the president of Coursera, reached out to us and said, hey, we heard you guys have this pretty popular software course. We don't really have something like this at Stanford. We still don't. And would you be interested, I'm kidding. I kid because I love. Would you be interested as a sort of pedagogical experiment in putting this course on our new platform? And we had been thinking about auto-grading. We thought, on the one hand, this would really let us see if we can pull this off or not. On the other hand, this sounds like a tremendous amount of work. There were no tools. Everything had to be done manually. But on the third hand, Dave said this is going to be big. He thought that there were enough technology trends converging that were making this kind of course possible, that this was going to be a thing. And by then, I think I had learned that when Dave says something's going to be a thing, it's worth taking a closer look. So for those of you who haven't tried or taken one of these first-generation massive open online courses, what you get typically is you get short video segments that stick to a particular topic, maybe some self-check questions sprinkled in with them. The videos might either be talking heads recorded in a studio, maybe it's captured live like we're doing here, and then it's edited down later. And there's typically deep auto-grading so that students get immediate feedback on their work, not just on things like multiple choice questions, but in our case, we had to invent auto-graders for complete programming assignments that actually are now giving more detailed feedback than students would get even from a TA. So we had now signed up to deliver a textbook, to convert our experimental course into the real software engineering course, and also to write a book. But Dave's impactometer said this was going to be big, so we added 8 or 10 hours a week to all the other stuff we're already doing to do the textbook. And the technology trends, I think, were there was a moment in time where it made sense to think about this. So we started working on our course. We were getting ready to launch in January, February 2012. We got a call from Andrew Ng saying, oh, by the way, just so you know, we're a startup now. Okay, that's fine. This is the homepage of Coursera.org in January of 2012, thanks to the Wayback Machine. Coursera.org is surely one of the very few .orgs that is capitalized at over $100 million. And what you can see on here is 16 courses. One of them is from the University of Michigan. The rest are pretty much all from Stanford and Berkeley. So this kind of started a trend. And just to skip to the good part, where are we now with this? We had 50,000 students the first time we ran our course. We've now had over 300,000 in the 5 offerings we've had. We're about to start a 6th offering. Over 20,000 of those have earned a certificate, meaning they did a threshold amount of work in the course, although whether they did it themselves is an open question that I'll return to momentarily. We're now in the 6th offering on edX, which the university has a relationship with to offer our free courses, and it's the highest overall grossing course on the platform, which is a combination of its popularity and how long it's been around. We've also got hundreds of instructors around the world who are using this in their classrooms. They're adapting our materials in some way, including making fairly extensive use of the materials that we created for the MOOC, and I'll come back to that as well. And along with a couple of other high-profile MOOCs that Berkeley was doing at that time, it sort of spurred Berkeley to institutional action, saying we need to have an institutional strategy on how we're going to invest in this area, what we're going to do, how we're going to value the efforts that instructors are putting in. That has ultimately led to over 40 MOOCs from Berkeley. A subset of them are actually shown here. We've got some very successful ones on Apache Spark by the actual people who created Spark. We've got one of the most highly rated artificial intelligence machine learning MOOCs. We've got ours. So it's actually been quite an experience to see Berkeley kind of, for an institution of this size, to kind of rapidly make a right turn and go in this direction. So that's great for the rest of the world. You know, these courses are out there. A lot of people have taken them. I could quote statistics about the number of people who have been exposed to Berkeley level of instructor quality because of this. But institutionally, one of the decisions we did make, because I'm on the committee that decides these things, is that the reason for us to do this institutionally was really, what is Berkeley going to get out of this? How are Berkeley students and faculty going to benefit from the enormous effort required to do these online courses? So let me talk a little about the impact that it's had at Berkeley. This is I think, spring 2012 photo of the classroom for my upper division software engineering course, which Dave and I have co-taught all but one of the offerings. The steady state enrollment is now 240 students per semester, which is up from about 50 in the past. In fact, you can see, you know, the blue line on this graph tracks enrollment since we started the experimental version of the course in conjunction with the lab. It's steadied out at about 240. The red line is the instructor ratings for the course. So these are all instances when Dave and I have taught it. And what's interesting is that the point at which the ratings jumped up to the 6-point-something range, where 7 is the maximum and is only asymptotically achievable, corresponds to when we had developed the materials for the online course and mixed them back into the campus course. So the students now had the benefit of these auto-graders. The videos were much better produced. There was a lot more interaction mixed in with the lecture compared to the sort of standard 75-minute lecture that would be delivered. And in fact, these are the highest instructor ratings and course ratings that this course has had in 20 years. And by the way, the last person to reach that level was Eric Brewer. So that was a good thing, right? I felt like I'm trying to live up to some of my mentors in that regard. This was so effective. The idea that you could take these materials, mix them back into the classroom, and improve the student experience while serving more students, that really kind of got our attention. And you know, I tried to take Dave's advice, come up with a good name for something. I came up with the term SPOC for Small Private Online Course to differentiate what happens when an instructor takes these materials, customizes them, and adapts them locally. And as I said, we've got hundreds of instructors now doing this at some level with our materials. I thought SPOC was a pretty good acronym. It's easy to say. It sort of, you know, it recalls Mr. Spock of the old Star Trek series, you know, a very logical, smart guy. If you look it up on Google and Wikipedia, turns out it also stands for the Sex Professionals of Canada. But fortunately, Google does the right thing, and our definition of Spock is the one that ends up percolating to the top. So I think one of the biggest innovations that we achieved in the course that came about partially as a byproduct of, my gosh, we have all these students, part of the course is doing an open-ended project. How are we going to find projects for all these students to do? Because we really thought that doing an open-ended project is really the essence of cementing the skills of software engineering. One of our students had a roommate who was working with a Berkeley business school group that provided pro bono consulting to nonprofits, typically on things like business plans and financial modeling and so forth. And he said, why don't you guys work with these nonprofits? We often get requests from nonprofits who, what they really need is technology help, and we can't provide that. So we started doing that. We've reached out to a number of Bay Area nonprofits through that group. Our customer list has grown. We even developed apps for some Berkeley research and campus units, including one that matches undergraduates with research opportunities. Universities. This is actually still in use in the College of Engineering, and several hundred undergrads have been placed through it. So this idea of sort of doing well by doing good is something that I think we brought to the course. I was looking over a spreadsheet this week, and we've done over 120 projects for over 80 customers since we changed the course format to do this. Another way to read that 80 out of 120 is we have a lot of repeat customers. They keep coming back either for new apps or to get new functionality added to their existing apps. So this is, I think, one of the things in Berkeley's DNA that I really, it resonates very well with me. And I'm glad that we did it. And if audio works, you can hear a little bit from one of the customers to get a sense of what the students are doing.
They contacted us and arranged to meet with us every week. Sometimes we met weekly, sometimes it was every 2 weeks, but never for more than 20 minutes, probably.
Yes.
Didn't take a lot of time for us, but trying to convey to them the rules that we have to go by for vacation. We showed them what we did, and then we showed them the rules and gave them a copy of the rules. It was so smooth.
Yes, they came back with ideas that we couldn't have put forward and brought into this institution.
Sounds like you got a lot of opportunities to give feedback on what they were doing, and that they tried to incorporate your suggestions.
And they easily fixed any
They
concerns.
did. It was amazing.
So now with this prototype in place, is there a plan to use this and hope things get better?
Correct, yes.
So our vacations are due February 1st of each year. And so we start usually in January, and we're going to start using it.
I think Laura and we're both on the 5th floor. We'll end up trialing this year, and if it's successful for us, it'll probably spread through other units in the hospital.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time and also for working with our students.
Thank you. It was great. It was a pleasure.
So we've got 120 videos, and a lot of them are like that, entry and exit interviews. It's really, I feel like we're actually doing something good for the world, which, you know, is one of the reasons that I think many of us have this job. And I just talked this week with my colleague Hank Walker, who teaches software engineering at Texas A&M. He has actually used our materials with the Spock model to scale their course from 60 to 160 students per offering, and he's told me that the sort of Central Texas nonprofit ecosystem now basically depends on them as a software supplier. So do well by doing good all around. So those of you who've worked with Dave, which is I think pretty much everybody in the room by design, you know that one of the things in the Patterson playbook, and if you don't know what the Patterson playbook is, please read my 2-pager. I think this is, I couldn't get it into this talk, but I think I captured it pretty well. When something works, shout it from the rooftops. Also, when something is clearly broken, shout it from the rooftops. And we're gonna do both of those. This educational change for software seems to be clearly working. So we wrote another op-ed for Communications of the ACM outlining why the approach worked, how instructors could replicate it. By the way, that was the #1 most downloaded / most read op-ed from January 2012 through January 2015, according to the ACM numbers. In case you're wondering, #5 was how to do a bad research center, another Patterson piece. And in case you're wondering, if you go to Google Scholar and you type software education, #2, once again. So for somebody who's not in software, that's pretty good, right? If Berkeley rewards impact, this is obviously a piece that had high impact. And as I said, our approach is now being replicated by instructors in the US and elsewhere, most of them with the use of some subset of the materials that we and our very capable staff of TAs created. Now, of course, you also know, if you've worked with Dave, that he's very big on getting feedback and acting on it. We had been giving copies of the book out to many of our colleagues, including people who were longtime software engineering researchers and practitioners. And part of the feedback that we were getting from some of them is, look, you know, this is a great approach, Agile is great, but maybe you guys have over-focused on Agile a little too much. Maybe you need to really present a more fair and balanced approach to some of the traditional software engineering methods. So, you know, Dave went off and started to learn about what those methods were. And at that time, it happened, this was 2013, the ACM and IEEE were jointly working on a revision to the software engineering curriculum guidelines, which had not been refreshed since 2004. So Dave went off and read those guidelines, and he was surprised to find, well, rather than, let me just give you the title of the op-ed that he wrote. Is the new software engineering curriculum agile? This appeared in IEEE software. Spoiler alert, the answer turns out to be no. The draft that we read did not heavily mention agile. Now, you can tell that although we're nominally both authors on this op-ed, you can tell Dave wrote it, because this is a sentence I would not have written because I don't have the guts. Of the 50,000 plus words in the standard, the word agile appears only twice. while plausibly excusable in the prior 2004 standard, it is indefensible in 2013. Why don't you tell us what you really think? So, to the great credit of our colleagues who are putting this draft together, rather than no longer inviting us to any of their parties, we were then invited to review and comment on the draft, and I'm happy to say that the final draft, which ultimately got released, has a much more prominent featuring of Agile, which we think is good for students for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that I learned from my advisor, Eric Brewer, is, look, sometimes you're going to ruffle some feathers, but if you're not being heard, you're not having an impact. Clearly, it was important to be having an impact, because I can tell you this was heard. What about the effect of all this stuff beyond Berkeley? This is the part where I'm supposed to talk about the future of. Many people prognosticate about this, but I'll try to give somewhat of a personal view of where I think things are going. Since that original slide that I showed you with Coursera, there's now on Coursera and edX over 4,000 courses from over 500 universities, most of which are world-class universities. The edX blog is filled with stories like this one. Akshay Kulkarni, who took several courses on edX, including ours, he didn't do so well in high school in India. He was at a third-rate engineering college, not inspired, but because of the courses he took, he was able to basically sail through his interviews and is now working at Microsoft India. So how representative are stories like this, and what does that portend for the future of this medium? We surveyed our students pretty obsessively, and one of the things we found is that something like more than 2/3 of the students had a baccalaureate degree or better, usually in a field related to the course they were taking. In fact, there was a free code camp survey earlier this week that found very similar proportions. So these proportions are remarkably stable across MOOCs today. And while stories like Akshay's are great, it means that MOOCs still have a long way to go before this promise of democratizing education is really fulfilled. I think, as Eric Brewer pointed out, one of the big impediments to that is MOOCs essentially assume that besides having a good device in your pocket, which more than half the world's population now has, you need reasonable broadband on a consistent basis in order to do some of these exercises. But we concluded from that initially that MOOCs wouldn't threaten undergraduate programs. Most of the people in them already had undergraduate degrees. On the other hand, a couple of years ago, it started becoming evident that the students who were taking these actually wanted something else. This is an acronym I'd never seen until last week. Harvard's. Highly accessible and rigorous, very affordable and recognized degrees. That is a backronym if I ever heard one. But sure enough, this is the direction that things are going. Most people here have probably heard of Georgia Tech's Master of Science in Computer Science. It's an online degree program developed with Udacity. It costs under $7,000 if you're admitted. And by the way, it's not really a MOOC degree because we have lower division CS courses here that are larger than any course in that degree program. But you get a real Georgia Tech degree at the end, and a degree, for better or worse, is still a negotiable unit of credit. Charter Oak State College and American Public University are offering credit towards online degrees for Coursera and edX courses. Who's heard of either of those places? I see one hand going up. The reason you haven't heard of them is that this is a classic disruptive technology. The incumbents nobody wants to be first to move on credit for MOOCs, so the second and third tier places are doing it, and they're doing it very aggressively. I would say within a couple of years there's going to be an inflection point. Arizona State University, which you have heard of as a respected public institution, is offering freshman credit for specific courses on edX that they have approved if you go through the right kind of proctoring and so on. MIT has a MicroMasters program that if you take these courses online and you're admitted to MIT, you can count the courses for credit and reduce the amount of time you're on campus paying tuition. What if you take them and don't get into MIT? There's plenty of schools, it turns out, who would also be happy to recognize those credits. So there's a soft currency exchange ecosystem happening now where I think there's going to be a structural upheaval in accreditation and the credibility that comes with it, and it's not clear who's going to get there first. One of the things Dave and I identified early on as a downside of MOOCs is we thought cheating was rampant. In particular, what if people enrolled multiple times with different online identities, harvested the answers from one identity, and then plugged them in the other identity? This has now been quantified. Here is a graph that shows, this is from Learning at Scale, which is the new premier conference for people who study these matters from a CS perspective. 2% of certificate earners cheated their way all the way through the course. They harvested every answer. Why is there a sharp drop-off at 65% of the answers? Most MOOCs set 65% as the pass threshold. So once they pass, they stop cheating. In fact, for that matter, the paper shows once they pass, they stop doing anything at all in the course. So I think as the MOOCs for credit thing heats up, the idea of how to get a grip on the cheating problem and integrity issues is going to become front and center. And I think a lot of us have been sort of punting on it for a while. Last thing, curricular tech transfer. We had a number of instructors doing the Spock model. You can see from the variations of what they used and didn't use that they're all using it differently. What has been preserved across all of them is Dave and I had a pedagogical approach that's captured by our lectures, our book, our assignments that come with automatic grading. That has been preserved. So I think the instructor's voice is actually better preserved by a MOOC or a MOOC plus textbook combination than by a textbook alone. I think it's going to be more difficult to write only a book that is not enhanced by some of these things. Lastly, CS research and education. Suppose we wanted to teach students to write better code, and suppose we did that by finding a path from a student's submission through other similar but slightly better submissions to the one that we really wanted them to arrive at. This is something we've actually been doing. This is like a research area now. The way to have, by the way, to have research not interfere with teaching and vice versa is do research on teaching. This actually works. We've got students who, in a randomized control trial, are getting better coding style faster with our automatically synthesized hints than without them. We're deploying it in the MOOC next time around. So I think the real legacy of MOOCs is going to be computer science researchers are now interested in education. When they got interested in bioinformatics and genomics, you probably heard from Dave's talk earlier, the SNAP fast sequence aligner has saved a life. So what might happen when CS researchers get interested in education? I think we're at the part of the hype cycle where we're actually starting to do real implementations. We did version 1.0. We know that we can reach lots of people. The actual learning science is what's starting to happen now. And it's going to be like the movies, right? The first movie projector, they just pointed a camera at some people. Pretty soon people figured out you could do things in the movies that you can't do in real life, that you couldn't put on any stage. That's where we are. So, to wrap up, what did we do? We somehow wrote an award-winning book in an area that neither of us is an expert in. We delivered the first MOOC from Berkeley, among the first on any platform. We reinvented software engineering. We kind of ruffled some feathers at ACM, but with a very good outcome for students. And really, we learned a lot and we had a great time. To me, that's what this job is supposed to be about. So thanks, Dave. You made it a lot of fun. And, but by the way, while the first question's queued up, there was a question yesterday about, Dave, what was the role of Comic Sans, the font that everybody hates? And he said he's one of those people who cares less than anybody he knows about fonts. I'm the opposite. So if you're curious, the body text, California, this is a font designed for the University of California Press in 1938 by Frederick Goudy, a very famous typesetter. And Futura, the display font also used in our book, was designed by Paul Renner in the Bauhaus style, a very forward-looking design in 1927, and also used in the first ever textbook on productive programming in a high-level language, 1961. So, okay, now questions.
Other questions? There's one back there.
I just want to make a comment, and actually I'm one of the 50,000 participants and 20,000 certificate earners of your first run of the SAS course on Coursera. Thank you. I just want to thank you, Armando and David. And I just want to make a comment. That course was very influential to me, and I passed that influence to my daughter by convincing her to major computer science. And she is a freshman here in UC Berkeley. Thank you.
So Ethan Miller, UC Santa Cruz. I was interested by the cheating numbers because you found about, I think you said 2% of the students appeared to be cheating. Informal studies across our university and others have shown the number, at least for in-person classes, to be 20%. What explains the difference? Is it that we're getting more cheaters, or you haven't found them, or something else?
Well, I think, so first of all, they studied a couple of particular courses at MIT. I have no reason to believe that those courses are abnormal. But I think part of it is just that campus courses right now, the stakes are still higher. You know, if you ask students why they cheat, and you know, all of us survey our students, one of the reasons that comes up is they feel pressure, especially here where it's hard to get into the major, that if they don't do really well in some of their entry courses, they won't be able to follow the major at all. Now, that doesn't make cheating acceptable, but I think as the stakes rise for MOOCs being available for credit and so on, I think the numbers are going to rise too, and they're going to have to get a handle on it. But actually, I think some of the technologies that are being developed for MOOCs to guard against and detect cheating after the fact are probably going to be re-imported back to the classroom, so that should help all of us.
Armando, great talk. I'm curious, you said you used open-ended projects for the on-campus course. I'm wondering, in the MOOC, do you have similar open-ended projects? Is my first question. And second is, what do you think isn't taught as well with the MOOC? Where do we have great value besides the cultural and hanging out and learning other views from other people when you're on campus? But what are the courses that work much better in person and that you see maybe MOOCs not having as much impact?
Yeah, so they're both great questions. So addressing the open-ended projects, right now the MOOC does not have one. However, we hope to do a sort of field test of a mini MOOC that does have one. And I think what's changed since a couple of years ago is all of the students are now using cloud-based services to do their code development, their debugging, their inter-team communication. And as instructors, you can get telemetry from all those that gives you some indicators of whether the students are trying to follow a process for building software. And a lot of what we're trying to teach them, at least in our course, is that. So I think there are paths to do, and Scott Clemmer has done probably some of the best work, if not the best work, on peer grading, especially for design-oriented open-ended projects. So I think there's a path to doing that, and for the students in Udacity courses, they have to pay, but they are actually getting some feedback on open-ended projects now. So I think this is a thing that's going to happen. Your second question was regarding what was the second question? What doesn't work as well? So the students that I have office hours conversations with, I give them industry perspectives, I help them debug their code. Those are great conversations, and I'm amazed more students don't come to office hours. But there isn't really a good equivalent of that, although I'm now involved in a company that is trying to scale the small discussion with a mentor model out to the rest of the internet. But at the moment, I think that's something that's not done as well. I think also a thing that we tend to overlook is universities do one other thing. They do it noisily, but it's an important function. They filter their inputs. So if you get into Berkeley at all, that's actually a pretty high bar to clear. It puts a lower bound, in some sense, on what your ability level is. It's much more challenging for these open courses where anybody can really enroll. So managing that diversity is one of the things that I think doesn't work as well, but that's because we're not controlling the input.
So I think we've got 2 more mics out, so we'll have 2 more questions with kind of quick answers, and maybe, John, you can come in and hook up your last.
Great talk. Technology makes lots of things cheaper and better, and I see the cost of higher education only going up. What do you see happening in the future? And by the way, I've got a couple of teenagers who are about to go to college, and I hope you tell me the cost is going to go down.
I don't want to make econometric arguments, but I will say that I think ASU is being very brave in trying this new experiment where if you take some of these courses online, some general ed requirements, you can potentially shave a year off of your residential campus time. And it's hard to argue that somehow 4 years is a magic number for being on campus, and you just wouldn't get the experience at all with 3 years. So I think there are ways in which the combination of those elements is actually, I think it is going to bring some cost down. And I think for the generations of students that are in high school now, talking to them about online learning is going to be like talking about mobile phones. Like, what other kind is there, right? There will always have been an online component to everything that they do, including learning. So I do think that those economies of scale are going to help. I mean, certainly we've seen on campus that, at least from our point of view, we are serving more students with the same resources, unquestionably, and they're reacting positively. So there's hope.
Armando, do you think there's an opportunity for the Patterson process or graduate education to be done as a MOOC? So a MOOC, grad school MOOCs? Let's talk about that over dinner. Short answer, yes with an if. Long answer, no with a but. But I don't want to use up my time slot any further, so.
Thanks very much.
All right, have fun.